Hi friends, welcome back to my channel and to another episode of Flute Life with Katieflute. Today I wanted to share with you how I learn a difficult piece of music quickly. Have you ever been handed a piece of music a day before the rehearsal? Or maybe your lesson is in an hour and you've been procrastinating practicing all week? I'm looking at you, middle school Katie. These tips don't only work if you're in a time crunch. Maybe you have a month to prepare for your performance, but you want to make sure that you do it the right way without wasting any time. So let's get started. So before we jump right on in and talk about the 5 practice methods, I want to first talk about the 2 main principles when you're starting to learn a new piece. Principle number 1 is to identify the trickiest parts of your piece and to zoom in on them. This is absolutely essential when you're starting to learn a new piece of music, especially if you're in a time crunch. This is not the moment to just try to fumble your way through the entire piece. You need to break down these passages into digestible sections. Depending on the difficulty of the piece, you could be breaking it down 1 measure at a time, maybe even half a measure or less. For a piece that's a bit more manageable, you can be working on several measures at a time or maybe even a line or 2. I know it can feel tempting to just jump right on in, but if you can break it down into these more organized sections, you're going to be doing a lot more efficient practice. The second principle of learning a new tricky piece is that you want to be constantly striving for the most accurate, high quality repetitions as possible. I'm sure you've heard the saying, practice makes perfect. I think the better way to put that would be practice makes permanent. If you are constantly playing wrong notes over and over again during your practice session, you're going to be playing wrong notes in the concert. So always strive for accuracy over speed. So now for my 5 practice methods. Practice method number 1 might be the most basic practice method, and I'm sure many of you already use this when you're learning a new piece, and that is to work it up slowly with the metronome. When finding your starting tempo for this, I always tell my students it needs to be slower than you think is slow. Often when we're practicing slowly, we think it's slow, but it's actually not really that slow. If you are in a big time crunch when learning your piece, you might have to start on more of the moderately slow side, but for general everyday practicing, I would advise you to start off really slowly. So I would repeat this section a few times at this first initial slow tempo, and then slowly, notch by notch, take it a little bit faster. I find that this method works when you have a bigger time frame to practice. You can even start one day, just working at the very slow tempo and not increase it until the next day or the day after that. My second practice method is to practice in different rhythms. You can get super creative with this method and basically use any rhythm that you want, but the main 2 rhythms that I like to use with my students, especially when I am introducing this method, is the long, short, long rhythm and the short, long, short, long, short, long. I find this method super useful, and anytime that I'm having trouble making the notes stick under my fingers, I like to turn back to this way of practicing. The next method that I like to use is adding 1 note at a time. So this method takes a bit more patience from you and from any of your neighbors who might be listening. It's very repetitive, but it gets the job done. Essentially what you do is you start with the first note in the section, and until that note feels like it's very secure under your fingers, then you can go ahead and move on to the next note. And then you repeat that process, and then you add on the next note. So you're kind of stringing together each note in a chain. This can be done with the metronome at a slow tempo. A while ago, I took this audition preparation course with Rob Knopper, who is a percussionist at the Metropolitan Opera, and he really goes into a lot more detail about this method. I had used this way of practicing before, but not quite to the extent that he talks about it. He explains that the best way to do this method is to practice it at your goal tempo, so never doing it under tempo, which I think is super effective. It might feel very tedious at first if you're not used to doing it, but like I said before, it gets the job done. fourth practice method is to play the passage backwards. This one definitely feels like an exercise for your brain as well as your fingers. But if you can play it backwards up to tempo, you can certainly play it forwards. The fifth and final practice method is to memorize the passage. I think we often think of memorization as an end goal for a performance that we want to, present our concerto from memory. But if we can utilize it in the practice room, even if we're not intending to play the piece from memory at the concert, it can be a really useful tool. Memorizing the passage really helps to force you to internalize it, and it's going to stick a lot better both in your brain and in your fingers. So there are the 5 practice methods that I have for learning a difficult piece quickly. I also wanted to mention that you can combine any of the 5 methods in any combination that you want. So for example, you can work slowly click by click up with the metronome while using the different rhythms. Or you can play the passage backwards from memory. There's a lot of room here for creativity, and practicing doesn't have to be boring. I get kind of nerdy and excited about this, but it's kind of like one giant experiment, and you're trying to find the solutions to the problem and to find what is going to help you learn the piece and have the notes stick under your finger in the best possible, most efficient way. So I hope this video was helpful. I'm curious to know if any of you already use some of these practice methods that I talked about, and if so, which ones? Do you like them or dislike them? Or if you have any other practice methods that you use, so please leave them in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future videos from me, and feel free to go follow me over on Instagram at katieflute. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.